first of all, a few words about Wheel and Anchor, what we're all about. And you see some pictures in front of you here about smiling, happy people. That is what we are about, which is bringing travelers together from all across Canada on trips that are a number of things. They're unique in a number of different ways, and you'll get a sense of that as I talk about this trip to South Africa. But I think what sets us apart is the fact that we really have an attention on having trips at a pace that you can really soak in the environment. You can foster relationships with your fellow travelers, with the people that you meet along the way. We are all about bringing travelers together, and I think that for those of us that have experienced our trips, largely agree that mission, and that they benefit so much more than just the destination, but about all of these connections that are made. And we often forget about that, but it's an important part of life, particularly when you get to that phase where you have the time to travel. And not necessarily everybody that you ordinarily hang around with does. And so it's nice to meet people, fellow travelers, because, we have lots of stories and adventures to share from going around the world. So that's kind of our mission at Wheel and Anchor. Of course, it's also about becoming well-traveled, traveling to some of these destinations and going off the beaten track. And, I almost hate that cliche because you hear it so many times, off the beaten track. What does it exactly mean? And I think that, again, this trip will be a little bit case in point, that we're visiting some of the famous touristic regions of the country, but we're not doing it in a conventional way. We're spending more time. We're doing what a lot of tours will do in a week. We're doing over the course of 15 days, because there is so much to see and experience in South Africa. And again, this is really what the mission of Wheel and Anchor is all about. And I think this trip is case in point. So before we get started, I'll introduce briefly our team. My name is Gordon Dreger. I'm the founder of Wheel and Anchor, and I curate every single trip that we offer based on my own experiences, but also based on the input of my team. This program in particular had a lot of input from two of my team members. Elsa, who's our director of operations, lives in Johannesburg, South Africa. And another person on our operations team, Daniela, is South African, but she lives in Italy. Anyway, that's another story. The other critical parts of our team, of course, our trip specialist team, most notably Barb, who you see on the webinar today. Good morning, Barb. And Paula. And they're the ones that answer the phone and deal with all of the myriad of questions that you have, even though we try to give you as much information as possible so you won't have questions, but there's questions, right, Barb?
There's always questions, yeah.
No comment. So that's the core part of our team. There's a lot of other people who play a role in bringing these amazing experiences together. So today we're going to take you a little safari around Africa, but notably this trip to South Africa doesn't have a safari, and I'll explain to you a little bit about that in a minute. But of course, there's always the option to go on safari when you're in Africa, particularly in South Africa. And I'm going to be your tour guide, and we are going to take a look at where we're headed this coming October, which seems like it's coming soon, but this trip is one of the big features of this trip is that it's a very small group. In fact, it'll be limited to an absolute maximum of 13 people. So we'll probably end up with between 10 and 13 on the trip, because we are in a mini bus that only holds 14 people, including our host. And so this is a great opportunity to see South Africa on a truly small group basis, which is kind of what our pride and joy is. So in any event, before I get into more of that, let's talk about the location, the map. Obviously, if you look at the inset map, South Africa is at the very southern part of Africa. And we are going to be visiting the Western Cape. So that is this area of land at the very south part of South Africa here. So starting in Cape Town, which of course will not be unfamiliar to you, even if you haven't been there yet, but you've probably seen about it on TV, one of the prettiest cities in the world. And we're going to be focusing on this region here, the Cape Winelands region around Cape Town, and then heading across the so-called Garden Route, which is the southern shore here along the Indian Ocean, making our way over to Storms Riviera. So this is our trip. We call it the ultimate road trip. We are doing it by road, but we are taking the time so that we can take in some of these amazing vistas, these amazing towns along the way. So the main trip starts in Cape Town, but we've decided to offer an extension program to Johannesburg. And I don't know about you, but I know the first time anybody said Johannesburg to me, I'm like, oh, dangerous city. Like, why would you go there? There's nothing there. It's just, it's full of crime and townships and all the rest of it. I must say from my previous visits to Johannesburg, in fact, I was last there visiting our colleague Elsa in May. Johannesburg is much more than what you think. It's actually in many regards a gem of a city. It's obviously by far the largest city in South Africa. It's not the capital, of course, the capital being Pretoria, about an hour further north of Johannesburg. But it is the cosmopolitan center. It's the center of commerce and finance. South Africa obviously has big industries like mining, and an agricultural industry, and this is the heart of where it all happens. And it's very vibrant. It has very diverse neighborhoods and all kinds of cultural landmarks that reflect the colonial culture, the apartheid era, which although you don't want to look back on that era, but you have to look back on that era because that's obviously something that in this world we're trying to avoid. So Johannesburg actually has a lot to offer for those that want to go in a few days earlier and explore it. There are definitely parts of the city that are less desirable and probably best not visited by tourists. We're not going to those areas. In fact, we're going to be staying in the so-called Rosebank district, which is one of the suburbs on the north, which is a beautiful area. In fact, you drive around and you almost think you're in North America. Other than the landscapes are a little bit more arid, classical of Southern Africa. So our pre-trip in Johannesburg will allow us to, and we call the second day, understand Johannesburg, because there really is a lot here to understand. We're in fact going to go with our guide right into the center of the CBD. We're going to walk around an area called Marshallstown, and we're going to understand a little bit about the evolution of this city. And anything that we do is safe. We're obviously not going to do anything that wouldn't be safe. But I remember the first time that I went on a tour into the center of Johannesburg, and I thought, oh, it's funny. This could be any city in the US. The similarities are remarkable. The difference, obviously, is how they got to where they are. And so you'll hear all about the gold rush. Of course, this area, the Transvaal, is one of the most important gold, mining regions in the world. So we'll hear about that. So we'll draw the colonialists in. We'll hear about obviously some of the history from dating back to Mandela, but obviously much before that, and what happened in the last 70 or 80 years since the last gold rush, and what has transformed the city. And we will have along the way some pretty incredible meals. But before I get into that, let's talk about the next day. So we're going to go a little bit to the suburbs, this time to the southwest side, Soweto. You've probably again heard a little bit about Soweto. This is the home of Nelson Mandela, a crucial area, and was certainly for those of us, which most of the people that are on this webinar, I think everybody lived through the era of the apartheid struggles, the struggles against apartheid. A lot of it was here in Soweto, where Nelson Mandela grew up and was practicing as a lawyer. We'll visit his house, actually. It's quite a stirring place. I mean, oftentimes you read about historical figures. We're going to go visit the house, and you're like, oh, it's just a house. But I tell you, there is a lot of energy here that says a lot about what South Africa is. And I think it's a must-see, to be honest with you, in South Africa, in particular in Johannesburg. And we're actually going to eat at a place called Soweto Towers, where we're going to enjoy a typical South African braai. A braai is like a barbecue, but it's so much more than that. It's a feast. And so we're going to be right in the middle of Soweto, enjoying some of the sort of the food and, the fruits of the benefits of what's happened. And let's be honest, South Africa has some very challenging problems, and it still has a very large part of the population that is very, very poor. And we'll pass by some of that, and we'll see some of that. And, there are all the problems that are associated with it. But the beauty can also see some of the positive sides of things. We get so much bad news as it is. There are positive things happening. And I tell you, Soweto is a very uplifting, positive experience. As I say, in spite of all of the challenges that they have. We're going to spend another day doing kind of a neat trip that is going to be jumping around at the various rooftops of Johannesburg. The landscape, the area, the environment around is quite flat. Again, this is part of the Transvaal, so it's long, great plains, and so that makes the vistas from the skyscrapers in Johannesburg even more spectacular. And one of the highlights will be taking in sunset at one of the so-called Hallmark Hotel. This is a legendary spot to look out over the city. And then afterwards, we're going to head down and have some live jazz. And by this point in the trip, you will sort of realize that, Johannesburg is in many ways a very livable city. As I say, it's not without its challenges, and it's not without its, with its very poor sections of town. But at the same time, there is a lot here, and it's a place that really, in many respects, shouldn't be overlooked. So that's why we're offering it as a pre-tour. However, the main trip, as I mentioned, will start in Cape Town, which doesn't need much introduction because you'll have all seen this picture at some point before, the famous aerial photograph looking from the from the Atlantic Ocean, up to Table Mountain, as well as Lion's Head and Devil's Peak, the two mountains that you see on the sides here. It is as beautiful a city as anyone will ever told you. We're going to be staying right in the center of Cape Town. So in fact, the CBD of the city is sort of here, and we're going to be staying right in the middle of the city, very close to some of the best hotels in the city. A short walk from the so-called V&A waterfront. That's this area here, which is a very popular and lively section of waterfront that was completely transformed when I went to South Africa the first time, which is 25 years ago. So we're within walking distance. Again, the other thing about Cape Town is that, in many ways you'll look around and kind of go, this feels like a Canadian city, because the similarities, in the architecture, in, the way sort of people, how shall I say, the streetscape, the way things look, everything operates the same. People drive obviously on the other side of the road in South Africa, as you will undoubtedly know. But you can take an Uber just like you would at home. Very, very livable city. There's also some great walking here. I've walked up to this Lion's Head. It's a popular morning hike. Doesn't even take very long from the parking lot up. Is about half an hour, 40 minutes, with some incredible views out to Table Mountain and down here to this area called Sea Point, which is another great walk along the promenade. You can walk all the way around to Camps Bay, which is just on the other side of Lion's Head here. So we'll spend a few nights here in Cape Town because it's worthy of every day that you can. Of course, we'll go up Table Mountain in the morning one day, the second day that we're there. For those that wish, anybody is really good for the climb. I've done it once. We can actually walk up to the top of Table Mountain. It's about a 3-hour hike, not for the faint of heart. I think most of us will probably take the cable car. And these cable cars that actually have a rotating cabin, so you get a 360-degree view. There's no bad standing spot in the cable car as you head up this incredible cliff, looking out. And again, the views are can't be described in words. It's really, really an incredible spot. And when you get to the top, it's its own sort of microclimate of a region. So you have quite different vegetation, and it truly is like a table. It's like one giant plateau on the top. It drops down then the other side down to Constancia and out to the Cape Winelands. So we'll have a light lunch up on the mountain because that day will be our formal welcome dinner. We're going to a very, very notable restaurant called Chef's Warehouse, which is in the Beau Constancia region with great views over False Bay. One of the reasons that I think South Africa is worth visiting, and I know this surprises a lot of people, but the culinary scene, the food in South Africa is awesome. And I mean, that's across the board, not just at the great restaurants that we try to pick on all of our trips, but even what we would consider to be fast food. And they have McDonald's and Burger King and all that stuff there, but their version of sort of, cafeteria style restaurants, the food is excellent everywhere. And it's less than half the price is in Canada, or a third of the price. So there's great value in going to South Africa, and you will have some of the most exceptional culinary experiences in your life. And again, a lot of people don't realize this, but these are some of the benefits that were brought during the era, excuse me, when the Dutch and the British came and settled here. Of course, they caused other problems, but you'll hear all about that in the history of South Africa. We'll spend a full day at leisure in Cape Town. We're going to give you a day pass to be able to, I think there's 80 different attractions that you can go and visit. But what I find a lot of people like to do is just literally wander around the downtown core. They have some neat areas like this colorful district called Bokap, which is where all the Cape Malay descendants lived in the area. There's some terrific museums, the Zeitz Museum of Modern Art. You can do a boat trip along the coast. You can do one of those walks along the seafront. People ask me about visiting Robben Island. It's also one of those things that people say you have to do, obviously where Nelson Mandela was jailed for much of his life. I get mixed reviews that's very interesting, but it's all part of what you can do on a free day in Cape Town. I will note Cape Town, the other thing that Cape Town is notable for is wind. It tends to be a very windy city. I mean, there it is. It's sitting down at the southern end of Africa. And so we may switch the days around. We always reserve the right to do this because the cable car can be closed. It's closed almost a third of the time because of high winds. So if we don't do the cable car the first day, we'll do it the second day, just again, depending on the wind. You can't make a visit down to South African Cape Town without heading to Cape Peninsula, the so-called Cape of Good Hope, which is not the southernmost point of Africa, as most people think, but it's the southwesternmost tip of Africa. You get to the Cape Peninsula itself, and it's a lighthouse on a rock. It's pretty amazing views. But when you look back up the peninsula, along the whole Cape Peninsula that you drive through, and it's all a protected national park. We'll pass by penguins in the Boulders National Park on the way. So we'll see some incredible sights and culminating at Cape Peninsula. We'll also have an amazing drive down Chapman's Peak Road, which is a toll road that connects Cape Town and Cape Peninsula. And for any of you that have seen our Facebook page, you'll see a picture of a group with a great backdrop there on Chapman's Peak Road. So I see some questions that have come in, and I will address all the questions at the Q&A session. So thank you for those. Yeah, thank you for those. And as I say, I will come back to your questions. So have no fear about that. So after a few days in Cape Town, we are now going to head a little bit to the east in the direction of the so-called Cape Winelands, in particular a town called Franschhoek. You might have heard of Stellenbosch or Parel, particularly if you've been to a liquor store at home in Canada, you shop for South African wines. This is where many of the most notable wines from South Africa actually come from. And Franschhoek, boy, what a lovely town. I've been so lucky. I've been here, I don't know, 4 or 5 times, and it is so picturesque. It's a little farming community, obviously with a wine bent to it, although they have a whole manner of agricultural products from this valley. French Corner is what it means, Franschhoek being obviously Afrikaans, which is very similar to Dutch. But what makes this town, I think, spectacular is the backdrop, just surrounded by stunning, stunning mountainsides, vineyards everywhere you look. It is just magical. And so we really, again, have the benefit because we're a small group with a 14-passenger bus. We're going to spend our time going along the Franschhoek wine route, visiting some of these private reserves. We're going to go into the places that big groups can't go because they can't, because you can only be a small group to visit some of these places. And we're going to understand a little bit more about the wine culture in South Africa, specifically in the Cape Winelands. And, like you visit wine regions anywhere around the world, but when you taste wines from where they actually come from, I'll tell you, it is a totally different experience. So we'll have a lunch at the winery, and everywhere, these tasting lunches, again, one will be better than next. You think you'd had a great one today. Well, more awaits. So that's why we've included as well in Franschhoek a whole day at leisure, because my biggest regret, having toured around Franschhoek in South Africa, is not having had the time to just tour around. So I've been to, as I say, Franschhoek 4 or 5 times. I've been to many wineries. I've never actually had time to wander around the town. And it's one of those places that craves for it. You're just like, oh, all these quaint little shops and antiques and crafts, and it's just magical. So we're taking a whole day to look around, but we'll also give you a pass to use the wine tram. So for those who are wine fanatics, much like myself, you can go and visit a whole bunch more vineyards, or you can just sort of roam around town on this wine tram. Or if you're a hiker, I've also wanted to always hike up into these mountains along here, so that's a possibility as well. So lots to do in Franschhoek. That's why I say we're really taking our time on this trip to try to enjoy some of these spots that are usually rushed past. In fact, most people visiting Cape Town do Franschhoek and Stellenbosch on a day trip. I've done that a few times as well. And honestly, when you're there, you'll think, why didn't I stay here? That's why we're staying there. We continue east out of the Cape Winelands area into actually what's another wine region, a slightly different wine region in this part of the Western Cape, and this is Hermanus. And Hermanus is a town that has an interesting claim to fame. Is first of all, it is one of the best places in the world for land-based whale watching. They have a beautiful promenade all along the town's waterfront, from which you can look out, and it's Mother Nature, so you never know, but odds are pretty good that you will see whales. They see them on a regular basis from land. Another interesting stop we're going to make here, which I have not visited before, is we're going to visit the Tewaterskloof Dam, which is the largest dam in the region. And why this is particularly interesting is because if you follow the news about South Africa and Cape Town, you'll know that they almost ran out of water about 4 or 5 years ago. They had a near drought. There was all of the reservoirs, of which this one supplies half of the water to South Africa, almost ran out. And luckily they avoided disaster. And so you'll hear a little bit about what's contributed to that, the issues with drought, how climate change is affecting. That's fascinating. It's really, really fascinating. And again, we'll have another wine tasting lunch on a beautiful estate with a picnic on the lawn. It's going to be terrific. And we'll also go out to do, we're going to do our whale watching walk. So an official walk on this day in the morning. It's our second day in Hermanus. And in the afternoon, we're going to head out to the Hemel en Aarde Valley, which is another lesser known wine region for us as North Americans, because when we get South Africa, it almost always says Stellenbosch or Parel or Franschhoek on it. But Hemel en Aarde has, in my experience, some of the best and most unique wines that I've ever tasted. It's vast, sprawling landscapes. You can see here valleys of rock that spread out, going away from the seaside, away from Hermanus. And it's here that they produce some of what I consider some of the best wines ever. And one of them was my favorite wine tasting experience that I've ever had in my life, was here at a place called Creation Wines, which is why I specifically wanted to include this in the program, because the views from this vineyard and the beautiful architecture and the incredible food. Every single wine tasting is accompanied not just by crackers, but they do canapes that are paired to the specific wine that you're tasting. I'll tell you, this blew my mind when I went to this place. So we're going to be visiting Creation because, as you can tell, I love it so much. And I've been itching to share this with members for such a long time. All in all, it will be a great day. And I remember a very dizzy bus ride back because we tasted so much great wine. We're actually going to head out on a boat as well, because obviously the best way to do whale watching is from a boat. So we're going to spend the morning going along the coast. We'll get to look back at some beautiful scenery, but more importantly, we'll be on the hunt for all the different whales that are typically swimming around in the waters off of Hermanus, being one of the most important migratory paths for whales from the Antarctic up to the Indian Ocean and beyond. In the afternoon, the other claim to fame of Hermanos, I mentioned there was a couple, is that this is one of the few places in the world that you can go great white shark cage diving. So if you've ever had the hankering to get into a cage, get submerged under the water and have great white sharks swimming all around you, you are more than welcome to do that. I have heard of people doing this. Won't catch me in one of those cages, but in case you're interested in it, that's called an adrenaline pumping moment. That's one of the things that Hermanus is known for. We continue our journey east, and now we're going to head into South Africa's famous garden route. And we're going to make our way to a lovely town that we're going to spend a few nights in called Knysna. You don't pronounce the K, it's called Knysna, the so-called jewel of the garden route. On our way here, and this is our longest drive of the trip, we're probably going to be driving in total about 5 hours between Hermanus and Knysna, but we're going to see some great stuff along the way. We're going to visit Cape Agulhas, which is the actual southern tip of Africa, the point which separates the Atlantic and the Indian Oceans. We're also going to visit the so-called Republic of Swellendam, a small village that, again, during colonial times declared its independence and was its own republic for, I think, a pretty brief period of time, but it's a cute little town. We'll visit Oudtshoorn, which is famous for their farmed ostriches. So we'll have a connecting with the ostriches experience where you actually get to feed the ostriches, and it's really, really kind of neat. And then if you can stomach that after we've fed and played with the ostriches, then we're going to go and eat them. Because if you haven't had ostrich meat before, and I'm sorry to any vegetarians that are out there, but ostrich meat is some of the most delectable in the world, and the South Africans prepare it like no others. So we will arrive later in the afternoon in Knysna, which in and of itself is an absolutely gorgeous town. Knysna sits in an interesting location. It's on a bay that is separated from the ocean by two large headlands, and there's a very narrow channel that you have to pass through to get inside. We're actually going to be staying on an island off of Knysna, which is sort of the higher end part of the neighborhood. The bay, the valley is so picturesque, which is, again, part of the reason that we're going to stay there for a couple of nights, because it is so beautiful. This part of South Africa is known for its oysters, for the quality, but also the price. They're inexpensive. You can get them for about $1 a shuck, as they say back home. So we'll definitely, for those of you who like oysters, be eating more than our fair share. While in Knysna, we'll be having one of our wildlife experiences on this trip, visiting an amazing elephant park. And again, just the scenery here is really what makes it all. And my pictures don't even do it justice. Here you can see the view from of the Knysna Heads and this colorful water leading into this inland waterway on which the village of the town of Knysna is sitting. We'll do a boat trip through this narrow passageway. But again, we'll have lots of free town, because like so many places in South Africa, this is one of those little places that will just crave you on to wandering around. And so it's worth it to spend some time to feel like you can get a piece of it at your own pace. We then leave Knysna and make our way towards Stormsrivier, which will be the final stop of our trip and the end of the garden route. So much beautiful scenery along the way. By the way, the roads in South Africa are impeccable. In fact, they put ours to shame. So all wide paved roads. I mean, occasionally we'll be driving off onto dirt roads, but for any of the longer distances, excellent roads, very smooth driving, very, very easy to get from one place to the next. We'll stop in Plettenberg Bay, one of the other highlights, charming towns along the garden route. And then we'll go to a place called Nature's Valley, where we're going to have a super duper place. And you're very close to the beach, but you won't notice it there until we sort of pass through some bushes. And then what will open up to you is this amazing vista of this incredible bay and beach. So this will be a neat little stop along the way to Stormsrivier itself, which is a very picturesque country town surrounded by some of the most amazing coastline in South Africa. This is what this region is known for. There's all kinds of treks and hikes that go along the coast. We're going to get a taste of some of that in the so-called Tsitsikamma National Park, which is considered the heart of the garden route, even though we're technically at sort of at the eastern end of it. They have all these wonderful walks, and we will be encouraging members to join us so that we can go on some of these, walk along these suspension bridges like you see here pictured, and just take in some of the most incredible coastal scenery that you'll find certainly anywhere in South Africa, if not anywhere. So overall, that will be the culmination of our trip. As I say, we'll overall, this is 15 days plus the pre-trip in Johannesburg, making for a 3-week-long trip, the ultimate road trip. And I can tell you, everybody that comes back from South Africa, it way exceeds their expectations, because what we envision of it, all the negative stuff that we read about it, is way trumped by all the positives of this incredible country. So I'll give you a few of the logistical details, then I'll answer some of the questions that have come in. So just to give you some bits of information about the pricing, the timing. So we're going to be going in October of this year. The pre-trip, the 4 nights there, including all the meals that I described and everything, coming in at 22.50 Canadian. Again, there's the whole list of stuff that's included. We're staying at a lovely boutique hotel, again, in Rosebank, in a suburb of Johannesburg. The main trip itself, and I think this is really great value considering the boutique hotels, the high-end meals, the small group that we're doing this in, again, 10 to 13 people. I encourage you, if you're interested, to come to South Africa. This is one that's probably going to sell out pretty quickly, because we've had a lot of people clamoring for this new trip, since this is the best iteration that we've come to, because we're curating pretty much the whole, well, not pretty much, the entire trip through ourselves. We have a wonderful local guide. Yeah, I've got only good things to say about it, which is, of course, I'm biased, but I'm sure you will agree if you decide to join us on this trip. So all the inclusions, all detailed in your program itinerary. So we'll let you review that and let us know if you have any questions. But in the meantime, if there's anything you'd like to know about the trip, now is a good time to pose any questions. Barb, I think a few have come in. So let's address those. Just a note, of course, as we have been doing with other trips, if you do sign on early for the main program, we give you $200 off if you register with us before the 15th of March. That enables us to secure all of our bookings and get deposits paid and all the rest of it. And so we pass those savings along to our members. So time for questions. But if you think of that one question that you didn't think of during the webinar, and you think about it 10 minutes from now, you can drop an email to Paula or Barb, and of course they will answer all your questions. So what questions do we have?
Yeah, we've got some good ones here. So one is in regards to what entry requirements, visas, health, vaccinations, etc., would be needed for this trip.
Yep. So good thing for South Africa, there's no visas for South Africa. It's a Commonwealth country, so they treat us quite well. So you can enter South Africa without anything but a passport. There are also no particular restrictions. There are no vaccination requirements. The only thing is, I have to say that with a caveat, which is, if for some reason you said, oh, I'm going to go and travel in Zambia before coming to South Africa, if you are arriving into the country from a country that is infected by yellow fever, for example, which Zambia happens to be one of them, then you would need to show a yellow fever vaccination certificate. But most of us are probably going to be coming from Canada, which means we don't need anything. In terms of other stuff, other vaccinations or prophylaxis pills, this is where we don't give advice. You need to read up on that on your own, or go to a travel medical clinic. All I can say is they'll give you a long list of things they think you should take. My opinion is probably not everything that they recommend, but I have to be careful what I say, because we are not giving medical advice on what's involved. But in terms of requirements, there is no requirement. So it's all voluntary.
Okay, good. We have a question about the safety walking around Cape Town. Is it safe at all to walk around alone all
It is,
times?
it is safe to walk around. It's as safe to walk around the parts of Cape Town that we're going to be in, meaning the CBD and the V&A waterfront and all the rest of it. During the day, it is safe to walk around. It's as safe as any North American city or Toronto. Which is not to say that one has to be always a little bit on alert, because there are pickpockets and all the rest of it. But there's no sort of violent crime happening in that area where we are going to be. Do I recommend walking around alone at night? No, I don't. That would be not suggested. But all of the places that we are going are safe. And to the extent that, like when we go into the center of Johannesburg, to the extent that there is a possibility of any remotely, we'll be with a guide, we'll be in a secured vehicle. And it is not, and this is the thing about South Africa that always astounded me, because I drove around Soweto and the CBD, and there are definitely areas where the driver said, yeah, we're just, we're not going to get out of the vehicle here. But it's not like they're all standing there with machine guns ready to shoot you. It's not like that at all. Yeah, it's quite safe.
Okay, good. There is a question, if people are not doing the pre-trip portion, where would they get picked up for the main part of the
In Cape
trip?
Town.
In Cape Town, yeah.
The main part of the trip starts in Cape Town. So you can fly directly to Cape Town from the main gateways in Europe. They do now have a service from the US nonstop to Johannesburg. So I think it is out of Washington Dulles, if I'm not mistaken. But that's a long, long flight. Most people going to South Africa prefer to travel via Frankfurt or Amsterdam, and then you can get a direct flight to Cape Town.
Right, yeah. And if people want to fly into Cape Town early to have more time, we can do pre-nights for them
Absolutely.
as
We can do
well.
pre-nights and post-nights anywhere along the journey if you want to carry on. Yes, one thing that I should mention, we specifically did not include a safari lodge on this trip. If you're thinking, oh, I'm going all the way to South Africa, I want to visit a safari lodge, we can give you some tips. But we had contemplated including a safari program in this thing, but I'll tell you, the good safari lodges in South Africa have a hefty price tag. And they're worth it, but they're expensive. So we decided to leave it off because, some people will say, I must go and I want to go to Kruger, or I want to go to Sabi Sands, which is a private reserve outside of Kruger. Or there's Kwandwe, which is the closest one to where we finished the trip on the garden route in Storms Riviere. So we can point you in the right direction if you want to do a safari. Just know that if you go a week on safari, that's going to be more than the price of our 2-week tour to stay in what I would consider the lodges that you'd want to stay in. So that's all we'll say about that.
Okay, so you just covered the next question that came in about adding a safari on.
You can
So
absolutely
that's
add a
great.
safari, and there's 100 choices. And again, we can give you some tips on that, on where you might look. But the beauty of safari experiences in South Africa is that they're pretty much all inclusive. So there's not a lot that we as Wheel and Anchor can add in terms of value to that, because you go there, it's full board, your game drives are included, often your beverages are included, the transportation is included. So therefore, we suggest the best value for our members is to choose one on their own. And yeah, we can give you a few tips.
Perfect. Okay. Who will be the on-site host, the Wheel and Anchor host, or?
We haven't decided the host for this for October yet.
Mhm.
But it'll be one of our much loved hosts. It'll be Amber or Todd. It won't, it could be, I'm not sure who it's going to be, but I promise it'll be somebody that you have a great time with.
Yes. And why don't we talk about weather a little bit, because that always comes up for people.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, being in the Southern Hemisphere, the weather is reversed. So October for them is basically spring, the middle of spring heading for summer, which is now at this time of the year. So the weather is pleasant in spring. South Africa doesn't get that cold, or at least the only place it does is up in the Drakensberg Mountains, where we're not going. So you're likely to have temperatures in the high teens to low 20s. Cape Town is fairly windy because of its location on this at the end of the Cape Peninsula, again at the bottom of Africa. So there's a little bit of wind, but it's on the warm side. During the night, particularly when we get in the countryside, like up to the Cape Winelands, Franschhoek, it can drop down to sort of 10, 12 degrees at night. But frankly, most people find that to be, you know, ideal touring weather. So it's really an optimal time of the year to go. And it's generally at this time of the year, it's generally sunny. So I mean, you could get some rain, but it's not a particularly rainy time of the year.
Okay. So yes, those are the questions that have come in so far. If people have other questions, they can definitely either call or email myself or Paula for more information. We do have a separate document that goes more into the nitty-gritty details when people are interested in a trip. So always reach out to get that if there's a specific trip you're interested in.
Absolutely.
And I posted the webinar for the 1st of February next week for Costa Rica in the chat box.
Yes, that's right. So before we wrap up South Africa, if you are interested in our Eco Adventure to Costa Rica, we have 2 departures for next January because this one was sold out so fast that we decided to add another one. So join us for the webinar, which is next week on the 1st of February. As Barb said, she's posted the link into the chat box, and it will appear in our newsletter this weekend, as always. Yeah, so final words to South Africa. South Africa is a destination you must visit at some point in your life. I love the country. I'm always looking forward to going back. The single prices, I see one more question popped in, are shown on the program itinerary. So for both Johannesburg and for the main trip, the single prices are shown there, and they're pretty reasonable because we've tried to find places that will be more amenable to solo travelers in single rooms. So yeah, take a look there. But do join us in South Africa. Again, it's a small group, which means the trip will likely fill up fairly quickly. If we do get a lot of people, then we will try to put on a second departure if we can get space in all these lovely boutique hotels that we've booked. But nevertheless, don't let that be a problem. Come join us for South Africa, and look forward to seeing you on one of our upcoming webinars. Take care and have yourself a great rest of the day. Bye-bye.